CS2 friction. I tested every CS2 latency settings, G-Sync, V-Sync, Reflex, everything. Let me see what this guy says regarding CS. What are the settings I should use? Because this guy is literally the best guy to listen to regarding anything in CS2. He's really smart.
Disabling full screen optimizations improves your latency. What about Reflex? What about low latency? VSync, G-Sync. What about valve settings? What about the input latency when you're actually in a gunfight? What about minus no reflex, NVIDIA cap, in-game cap? Well, today I will answer all your questions. Not only that, I actually have a setting that I can now recommend, which almost every one of you can use without a second thought. And very specific suggestions if you're really that kind of fine-tuned option for yourself. Let us start by the most important point I want to make. Your input latency is very dependent on your frame rate in CS2. So performance issues in gunfights will affect you severely. This is why I can't just run all the tests at 1000 FPS, as it makes a whole lot of these tests useless. We must account for our frame times during intense scenarios. Next, we also have the problem of GPU bound scenario.
So this is what we're talking about when we play the game, when we feel like sometimes the bullets aren't registering. Depends on your performance. If your PC is getting hot and you have like drops in FPS, your bullets in your registration and lag will increase, right? Or am I stupid? Because it feels like sometimes I'll have a game where I'm like playing good and I'm hitting everything, and then I'll join the next game, or sometimes even the third, fourth game, and the longer I play, the worse the registry becomes. Does this happen to anybody else?
I have a 5070 Ti, so for me, I never run into GPU bound scenarios in CS2 as I run my game at 1080p 240Hz. You do sometimes because CS2 is buggy, especially when you start the game, and sometimes Molotovs can make some of your PCs perform like a slideshow. It happens on my laptop especially. What about being CPU bound, as CS2 is extremely CPU intensive? I run a 7900X3D. It is a really good CPU, but sadly CS2 is just a different breed when it comes to 1% lows. Hop into a 5v5 and see how your 1% lows crash, just like FaZe Clan when you're in a gunfight or smokes or molotovs are flying around. So the combination of a whole lot of these settings, Clan, when you're in a gunfight or smokes or molotovs are flying around.
Look at that. 380 from 600 to 380.
So the combination of a whole lot of these sets are also tested at low FPS like 64, 110. Another important thing is doing at least 500 samples of testing. This is because one simple bad timing of one input can make a setting look really good or bad when the sample size is really small. Here is the complete method I follow to measure the input latency.
It goes down to 280.
Leonardo, it records a timestamp while logging the time at which the mouse 1 signal is sent. Then a luminance increase is detected at muzzle fire, creating another timestamp. Do this 500 times and this gives you a very reliable end-to-end input latency. This is free from any telemetry bugs that can arise from lack of markers, lack of jitter, or due to high jitter. To prevent quantization errors, test did not have a fixed interval rate and a certain level of randomness was used. To prevent faulty readings, luminance levels were checked in different light conditions to make sure the threshold is only crossed by the muzzle fire and not some other light on the screen or in the room. Doing all of this took me quite a few days, so let us answer all of your input latency related questions now, right after the sponsor.
Guys, I'm running $55,000 per month. You have in leaderboard, so if you love Gamba, there's 3 leaderboards down there that you can check on my website. So check that out in the pinned comment, and now let's get back to the video.
Let us start by finding the best setting to use with VSync and G-Sync.
So, Reflex, this is the one. Reflex enable FPS max 0. Best. Worst. This is like average. Worst. Best. So this one is the best, but this one has the lowest worst, so this is like the best mid. So it's this one then this one, right?
All low latency.
I would prefer this one than this one.
Most settings, I used no reflex as the launch option. I kept my FPS to 237 via NVIDIA control panel to prevent VSync from kicking in. With LLM off, I had an average input latency of 13.0. With LLM on, I had an average input latency of 13.13. With LLM set to ultra, my FPS auto capped to 225 to 24, resulting in an input latency of 13.3. Setting FPS max to 0 and reflex disabled results in additional latency as expected since VSync is always active. Enabling reflex drops your latency by more than 2 milliseconds, and I'm not even GPU bound. When I use VSync and G-Sync, the best option is to enable reflex or set it to boost for the best input latency.
Honestly, I would prefer putting this one than this one, in my opinion.
You don't have to do any capping via NVIDIA control panel. Now moving on to what happens with FPS max 0 and VSync turned off. Averaging 1100 FPS during this test, none of these settings make any change. If you can consistently put out 1100 FPS without being GPU bound, you really don't have to worry about any setting. Now, let's move on to reflex. We see the same trend following. Turns out when you're running your game at 1100 FPS, none of these settings really matters.
Wait, who the fuck can run 1100 average FPS on CS2?
So you have been sitting around the same input latency setting at reflex disabled, enabled, and enabled plus boost. That is around 9.8. I did conduct these tests quite a while ago to simulate GPU load, which is approximately about 98%, and I set everything to ultra 4K SR uncapped, and enabled plus boost did help. So it is a safe assumption that all of you should actually enable your reflex. Now, of course, you're not going to get 1100 FPS. In fact, during gunfights, high smokes, Molotovs, instances like this, your FPS can even drop below 100. Even if your average FPS doesn't drop, your real FPS.
You're gonna, like, I have 5090, and I have the newest, the newest CPU X3D. So I think these are the two best things you can have, right? And I get drops to 300 FPS on a 360 Hz monitor. That's not good.
So what happens in these situations? Well, I created a hypothetical scenario where your, let's say, FPS is set to 64, and over here, if you use reflex enable plus boost, reflex enable, reflex disabled, you have an input latency of around 15. But if you use the no reflex launch option along with the NVIDIA control panel cap at 64, you have almost twice the latency as that of any other setting. Now, it doesn't matter if you set it to ultra on or off, it doesn't make a difference. Your input latency is still going to be pretty high. Why not just test it at 110 again? So at 110, I capped my FPS with enabled and boost using FPS max 110, reflex enabled 110, reflex disabled 110, and even no reflex but with an in-game cap at 110, and all were sitting around 12 and 13. However, no reflex, again with an NVIDIA control panel cap, gave me an additional latency, almost 18.93. So as you're in a gunfight and your FPS is dropping, the setting which is going to give you the most input lag turns out to be with the launch option of no reflex and being bound by your NVIDIA control panel cap. So let's move on to the other test as well. Again, we disable reflex at 100 FPS, but now we are capping it using our NVIDIA control panel cap. So it is not just the NVCP cap that is affecting the latency, it has to be both the launch option and the NVIDIA control panel cap, which is quite unique and strange because a lot of people tell me that they feel better with no reflex, it feels much more smoother. And it may be, you know, that may be the truth. And I tried playing with it many times, but I just feel so delayed. And I've said this way before, like maybe when this setting started getting launched, or everybody started recommending them based on some bug reports where people saw false 1% low increase and stuff like that. And that was quite the straw of it, but I don't really like it. I just feel like it's delayed, but you do yourself. Now coming to Valve recommended settings and reflex uncapped. Over here we can see that the input latency rise is just 1 millisecond. Now the performance issue is completely different, which I have to go in the next video because this video was just getting too large. Now everything I tested up till now has been 500 samples on Windows 24 S2, and my CCD0 was used via process lasso and CCD1 was disabled via process lasso. Turns out if I just disable it via my motherboard and switching to Windows 25, and now I'm conducting for 150 samples, my input latency dropped by 1 millisecond across all my tests. So now all the tests you're seeing are being done with these settings. So that's why there is a 1 millisecond decrease. So what happens with disable full screen optimization? Does it help your latency or not? Well, not really. Both of these came out to be the same. With enabled, you actually had better performance. So the default version actually gave you 8.44 milliseconds of input latency, whereas the disabled full screen optimization work, which is supposed to
So
decrease.
this is what everybody's doing, right? The disabled one. Yeah, everybody's doing that. It's better routed. That's what I thought as well.
In fact, with enabled, you actually had better performance. So the default version actually gave
So
you
you don't put that.
8.44
You don't
milliseconds
put
of
the disabled. I never put it. I think even now I don't have it put.
Whereas the disabled full screen optimization work, which is supposed to decrease your latency, give you higher input latency. Does G-Sync on and G-Sync off affect your performance? No, it didn't affect my performance at all. It was almost the same within the margin of error. Nothing really changed. You can use G-Sync. It's really good when your FPS goes down. Now, by G-Sync, I mean FreeSync Premium, whatever you have, you can enable it, any sort of variable refresh rate technology. Now, what happens in this kind of test? I also try to test it with 150, so reflex enabled plus boost sitting at around FPS max 150, and then no reflex with NVCB cap.
Bro, I saw a lot of people adding this.
50. So again, we see an increase in input latency. So I'm not really recommending, if you guys like it, use it, but I cannot recommend it. The funny thing I find about all of this is that full screen windowed, and windowed mode all have the same input latency. All these tests were conducted at 1920 1080p, by the way, and reflex was enabled and set to boost. What about these two settings? What if you turn them off? Well, again, they make no difference. Everything is within the margin of error. All of these were tested in windowed mode, 1920 by 1080p.
Bro, props to this guy. Look how much he did, bro. Look at how much he did and how much he investigated to help the community. Bro, Valve don't do even half of this. Valve don't even check the map they're releasing in the game. Look at what this guy spent time on doing. Imagine Valve hired him or somebody like him to work on the game. We would actually have a working game. Valve don't even test when they make an update if is the boost fixed. But people start getting stuck in mid-air while boosting. Like, bro, every fix they do, they don't check it. This guy spends few days checking the input latency. Mental what he does, bro.
And again, no meaningful difference here. Everything here is in margin of error. I suggest you just keep it on as default as set by Windows, especially if you're on Windows 11. Now, coming to DirectX 11 and Vulkan gives you 15.89 milliseconds of input latency.
Yeah, I saw this on X. Somebody was crying about this, and he as well showed proof of this.
DirectX 11 gives you 8.44 milliseconds of input latency. That's actually quite shocking, the amount of difference you get with this. Now, I tried to find out whether the current CS2 version actually got better maybe. No, it wasn't the case. So, turns out all the 1 millisecond input latency that actually improved came from either Windows 25 S2 or me disabling my CCD1 via my BIOS. Now, a simple bandit fix would be to run your game either at uncapped and just enable your reflex, or put it to enable plus boost.
It's my first game experience on a new account.
This is the simplest way to play the game. Now, let's say if
you know that Gabe follower and those guys are posting how game has been fixed. They have banned cheaters. They have removed bots. But then you start the game and the first thing you get is cheaters, and the second thing you get on that match is bots. But somehow Valve fixed it. You know, like, bro, I swear somebody must be paying these guys to post those lies.
GPU temperature increases quite a bit, and you can suffer from thermal throttling, especially if you're on a laptop.
Yeah, this got cancelled.
I would suggest putting it to just enabled and not enabled plus boost, because enabled plus boost forces your GPU clocks to be high, therefore increasing your GPU temperature, which will again cause thermal throttling. So setting it to enabled is a really good kind of easy fix. But if you're looking for that kind of low-key perfection, you can see your GPU temperature, see the rating of your GPU, like what temperature does it start to thermal throttle, and if you're safe within the margin of limits and you have
that's such a bad edit.
Kind of power consumption, you should set it to enable plus boost. And what if you want to play with VSync? It is completely acceptable, at least from an input latency point of view. and you can play with it. And no, do not cap your FPS 3 below the value, 10 below the value, 14 below the value. Use LLM Ultra. That is not really going to give you better input latency. This is actually going to give you worse input latency. Enabling reflex will give you better input latency. Now, a lot of people will talk about how it affects the performance actually. Now, there are a lot of bugs. This is the reason this video was getting so large. Like, I'll show you a graph right over here and you'll feel like this is the perfect setting to run CS2 in. But trust me, it's a bug. So I'll cover that in my future video, but if you're running VSync, please just enable reflex. That's the best setting that I can watch for. Now, what if you have an AMD GPU? Sadly, I don't have an AMD GPU, so I did not test it, and so I cannot give you an opinion on it. You can take opinion from other internet people, but for me, like, I have to vouch for the tests I do. I know the quality of tests I do myself, and only then I recommend them to you. So I know for sure that these settings work, they're right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you to all my channel members, and watch out for the future content. I'm really sorry I make some delayed content. I get quite a bit busy nowadays. So take care and see you later.
Guys are top G. Guys are top G.